Hello, and welcome back to Parley. This one was paid for by Quartermaster Sea. Hope you'll enjoy listening. This one is about something I've been very excited to talk to you about, tower defense endgames. We're going to talk about Arknights today, but tower defense endgames. Good endgames in video games in 2023? Impossible, but it is. You introduced me to this game, Quartermaster Sea, Arknights specifically, and I really liked it and have been playing a lot of it. So you heard that and decided to ask me another parlay about Arknights stuff. If you don't specifically play Arknights, I still think this is of great interest in that, again, a good end game for a game, impossible. Like, really? I think so. There's definitely some stuff to extrapolate about what makes it, what would make something a good end game. So we'll talk about that. Quartermaster Sea says, Parley, another Arknights question for the captain. Now that you've had a chance to experience both of the endgame modes for Arknights, integrated strategies, and contingency contracts, I'd like to hear your thoughts. For some guiding questions, what do you think each game mode is intended to test players on? And do you think they do a good job at it? Which mode do you find more enjoyable? What would you choose about the mode? Change about the mode you enjoy the least to make it better? What would you change about the mode you enjoy the most? Well, I don't prefer either of them much, but I think you knew that from watching me long enough. I'll talk about what I would change, if anything, about both of them. I don't prefer either in any meaningful way. I like both of them a lot. Tower defense. Do we need to explain what this is? You enemies come down a thing and you build towers, fortifications and such to stop them from getting to your goal, your base, I guess, from a flavor perspective. And tower defense games are interesting to me partially because I haven't experienced a lot of examples of the genre over the past, maybe 20 years. I venture that maybe there aren't a gigantic number, compared to other gameplay formats, gameplay loops. Maybe this one hasn't been iterated quite as much by the gaming industry. And so when we play one, when you play Arknights, if you are in my position, which some of you may be, you haven't experienced a bunch of these over the years. This is like you get all of the game design updates to the technology of tower defense over the past 20 years, sort of all at once. That definitely had a big impact on me when I started playing Arknights. It was a real treat from a game design perspective, but it is still a good game in some ways, and we will talk about those things. But Quartermaster C's question is about the end games. I think I would agree those are the sort of two end game modes for Arknights. Maybe you could say Annihilations or a third one, but we won't get into that here. No need to complicate things even more. So what are they? And in what way are they good end games? What even is a good end game? Let's talk about what they are first. I'll talk about what I like or dislike about them as we go through them. So we'll do one then the other. And then at the end, yeah, I'll go on a little bit more about what I think is a good end game, if we haven't already covered that. For a quick summary, integrated strategies is what you might call the sort of roguelike gameplay loop that has been integrated into many games nowadays. It's become increasingly common at the time of this recording for games that are not mostly that to incorporate it, which makes me happy because I think using roguelike and really most things people use as genre terms is not very helpful. The roguelike thing has come to mean essentially an arcade style format where you gain upgrades as you go and they reset when you die. And you'll hear a lot of people using different definitions that I would argue if you play a lot of the games coming out right now, that those definitions don't apply. Like it has become kind of arcade mode in games, or it is becoming that, I would predict, I guess. And that's what it is in Arknights. So integrated strategies, to summarize, I would say tests you on your the variety of tools on your account and your ability to operate while they're very restricted. You don't start with, all of your units on your account, all your different towers, which are characters in this game. So as you defend, your base on each of the maps throughout your run in integrated strategies, you have to recruit units to defend your base with. You start with only a few. And sometimes your squad will have a particular hole that, you're going to have that unit prepared and know that they would fix that problem and then put them in. I would say it tests you on your knowledge of units, like breadth of knowledge of units, and your breadth of account. In other words, how much of a large variety of options do you have, and how much you know how to use them. Team building, not using the exact squad that you've built up over a long time necessarily. Whereas contingency contracts are more like a single or a variety of very challenging maps where you kind of build your own difficulty. You add a bunch of difficulty modifiers, but you can use all the units you have. You can use a support unit with impunity. And so it's testing more maybe the depth of your primary team rather than having a broad variety of utility. It's testing how powerful your strongest utilities maybe are. I would think of it that way, allowing you to use everything and seeing how well you can do. So integrated strategies first. Yeah, it's really cool. I think integrated strategies is the more important of the two, and I think the most important game mode in Arknights. That might sound like a weird thing to say, the most important mode in a game, but I think that it is, and the reason is that it does the most to validate a lot of the game systems. In a lot of games that feature a lot of different characters and you roll randomly with potentially money for lots of different characters, there's this problem where rarity is awkward. If a character is of a higher rarity, what does that mean? If they're literally just stronger, then the game is going to have difficulty not being pay to win, which will be unsustainable for a large audience. Like, you simply won't be able to attract a large enough number of people for the game to be really sustainable. I mean, I suppose maybe some games haven't tried that. I'm sure there are games that maintain themselves with a surprisingly small audience. But the general populace isn't going to be able to spend that large amount of money. Sorry, I'm just tweaking the light because it's too bright, on a game. And so it's going to have to be reasonably accessible somehow, and that means you need to do something about units that are higher rarity just being better. Integrated strategies does a couple of things. The obvious one is that when you recruit units in integrated strategies for your squad, they cost more to recruit, more of a currency specific to integrated strategies, if they're higher rarity. So at the beginning of a run, for example, you get kind of 6 recruitment points. You could think of it that way. A max rarity unit costs 6 points to recruit. So you can take one, but then you need to take all very low rarity units, very low rarity, not just a few rarities lower. I would say in Arknights generally, and it's an oddball because we go up to 6 stars, but 6, 5, and 4-star units are maybe your bread and butter. And by the time you get to 3-star units, there's a few that are really useful, but these things are getting a little more questionable. And the 2-star units are very weak most of the time. So while units have different strengths, and even some of the 2-star units do see use and really do have different strengths, but only a few of them, you are put in a situation where you need to use significantly much weaker units for the rest of your team if you choose to go for a 6-star at the beginning of the run. That really validates the idea that we have different rarities that overall are more powerful. It makes it so that isn't just reductive. Like, there's a reason not to just use all 6-star units, and the reason is that you just can't. Which is sort of an awkward reason, but it's definitely better than nothing. Like, it's good to have a reason like that. The other way that integrated strategies restricting which units you can use and demanding utility from you kind of validates having a lot of different units is maybe more indirect. The other obvious way to make it meaningful to have lots of different characters in your game is to make them have different utility. Like, they're just good at different things. And having it be that you want to recruit a variety of units to fill holes in your squad validates that utility. units in Arknights do have different utility. You can do that even if you didn't have this mode. You could have it be that a 6-star unit is more powerful overall, but they simply don't do something that a 5-star unit does. Therefore, if you value that thing or that thing is rewarded on this map or whatever, then that unit is stronger. Maybe obviously. But my point is that that comes up a lot more if you restrict the player's resources quite a bit. You know, a lot of problems in a lot of games can be overcome with numbers. When I'm trying to clear a challenge in Arknights, and I see that other people have been using a unit I don't have, well, the easiest thing to do is just use multiple units that each do some of the thing, or just have so much output that it overcomes that enemy. Something like that. And so creating a situation where you simply can't throw a ton of units at the problem makes it much more interesting, I think, much more worthwhile to pick a specific solution that you kind of need. Just for a simple example, there's a unit that is pretty popular and very useful in integrated strategies, Podenko. Podenko is a peculiar unit who has an ability that lets her turn into a healer. Normally she does some magic damage and slows enemies, but she has an ability that temporarily makes her into a healer. This sounds maybe bad. Don't you need a healer a lot of the time? And then she can't heal if you need more healing or whatever. But the flexibility on a map where you really need that healer, if you only have 3 units at the beginning of the run, and one of them you can hit a button and then you have a 4th unit that is a healer, you just have to turn off some of your damage for a second, it can be very valuable. And she has another skill that does good damage, so it's not as though you get a completely inept magic damage dealer in exchange for them being able to do the healing. Yeah, she might be a little bit worse at it, but you definitely don't sacrifice a fatal amount of effectiveness in exchange for that flexibility, which can be really useful. And there are lots of other types of units that, frankly, this is kind of an indictment of Arknights overall, but there are a number of types of units that don't make much sense except in integrated strategies, which is weird because it was added to the game, quite a bit after the game came out. It's not like this was an original part of Arknights, right? So it really is a proper end game for the game. Just a few other quick examples, because they're sort of funny. There are, again, quite a lot of units mechanics, I'll get into that too, that don't really make that much sense unless integrated strategies is the game, but a lot of the game isn't. That, anyway. Contingency contract plays into them too, but anyway. So for example, there are some merchants, that's a class, a subclass. Merchants have this mechanic where they charge you deployment points. That's basically the money that you use to deploy towers, which, remember, in this game are characters. Merchants charge you deployment points to be on the field. So in exchange, they're pretty cheap to deploy at the start, because you're going to pay for it over time. They're pretty powerful for the cost. They can be redeployed quicker, so if you take them back because you just can't pay anymore, or you run out of money and you can't pay anymore and they retreat, you can put them back on the map quick, because they're going to leave again if you can't pay for it. And they do a lot of damage. Generally, the merchants are also balanced out by not giving you exactly immediate impact, because if they did give you immediate impact, then you wouldn't have to pay much over time. So for example, the 4-star merchant, Jay, his abilities take a few seconds to kick in. The flavor is that he's a chef and he's, preparing the food for the meal, and then he starts killing the enemies with his butcher knife. That's very satisfying. The sound effect of that is very satisfying. If you play Arknights, Jay's sound effect on his skill 2, ooh, chef's kiss, so good, literally chef's kiss. But the mechanic is meant to be that, you need to leave him out for a little while, or he just doesn't do anything, because if he did something right away, you wouldn't ever pay the cost over time. You would just retreat it. A cool idea, cool piece of flavor. That's good design or whatever. But there's an entire class in Arknights, Vanguards, who generate a ton of deployment points, money, basically. And if you simply pair Jay with a good number of Vanguards, an incredibly popular thing to have on a lot of Arknights themes, well, it's not very difficult to pay the cost. If you're bringing a normal squad of 12 units in the rest of Arknights, it's really not that difficult to pay and then a lot for merchant cost. Now, that doesn't mean it's meaningless or anything, but I'm just saying that it's a much, much more meaningful restriction when you're playing integrated strategies and you know, literally can't pick to bring a Vanguard and a Merchant and any meaningful other squad members, right? You just don't have enough space at the beginning of the run. You might still use Merchants. They're actually still very popular, but they come with a real cost when you use them that way. They make it so you do not gain deployment points anymore. Their cost over time to stay on the field is balanced to be the exact amount of deployment points that you gain naturally. So when you deploy them, you stop gaining, or you net 0 deployment points. You don't gain or lose any over time, which is a more meaningful trade-off. So you basically need to deploy everyone you wanted to deploy or have banked all the deployment points you're going to want, unless you're willing to retreat the Merchant, which again is just a much more, I think anyway, a more meaningful mechanic in integrated strategies. For that matter, classes, an entire thing in Arknights, don't really mean much except in integrated strategies and contingency contracts, which we'll get to in a minute. Characters have classes. There are vanguards, guards, defenders, casters, archers, medics, supporters, and specialists, and a bunch of subclasses for every single one of those. So for vanguards, they're basically ramp units. They're low cost, they're pretty efficient for the cost, but their kind of ceiling on power is a little bit low. And generally they have some ability that lets you gain deployment points using them. So there's various different kinds. The subclasses for vanguards are all different ways that they gain you deployment points, basically. Pioneers, for example, literally just have a skill that charges up over time and it gives you a block of deployment points. Flag bearers give you even more deployment points with their skill when it's activated. But the skill gives you deployment points only over time, you know, not immediately, usually, or you don't get all of them immediately. And the Vanguard, the Flag Bearer Vanguard, cannot participate in combat at all while their skill is going on. So they'll do their thing, and then it might have some effect on the battlefield, but they can't attack or block enemies while it's going off. So they generate even more than Pioneers, but they sort of abandon some battlefield effectiveness. Not general bruisers like Pioneers are. Then you get into the weirder stuff. Chargers don't generate any on their own, but when they get a killing blow, they generate 1. And when you retreat them, you refund all of their cost as opposed to half with normal units. So if you can get a few kills, I mean, you just got 3 deployment points for free because you get all the cost of deploying them back when you retreat them. But you have to finagle a situation where they actually get kills or it doesn't do anything. Does that make sense? And there's other variants as well. Agents are kind of a riff on chargers, I would think of it as. They generate deployment points only when attacking enemies. That sounds easier, but they usually generate very few, like literally 1 per attack. And they don't refund when you retreat them. You know, they refund half like normal. So you need to give them a lot of HP worth of enemies to attack, or they can't really net you any benefit. You know, you could have just deployed a stronger unit that doesn't generate deployment points. If you can't get them to lay into some enemies. In exchange, they have a little bit of range. A lot of them do very good damage among vanguards, and they have a quicker redeploy time. They're a little bit more versatile. Cool stuff. There's lots of archetypes for all the classes. You know, guards, you have some that do magic damage, some that do physical damage, that block different amounts. They're the Centurion guards, I think they're called that use chainsaws and deal damage to all of the enemies they block. So they can do, it sounds like a defensive unit, but the idea is if they can block a lot of units, their overall damage output goes nuts. They're not necessarily particularly tanky, although one of them is. If you play Arknights, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Very overpowered example of that archetype. Sniper is self-explanatory. You know what archers and snipers do. There are casters. I'm not going to explain what casters are, but the various archetypes, you know, there's chain lightning casters, a whole group of those. There are the true AoE ones. There's a group of casters called mech casters, mechacord casters. These have abilities that if they attack a unit and the unit leaves their range, the mech can follow them and keep hitting them a little bit more. Weird little archetype, usually pretty good though. Medics, I'm not going to get into medic archetypes that much, but I assure you it's very interesting and I would love to. It just isn't that relevant. The reason I'm bringing this up is that in integrated strategies, you get given a promotion voucher, like at the end of each fight, to build out your team over the course of a run, but for a specific class. So having a class that does something that is, pretty distinct. Most of the time, this class just generates deployment points. But there is a Vanguard that has a kind of janky heal. That's huge in integrated strategies. Normally, who cares? Like, I'll just bring a healer. Not always, sure. Maybe I want to fill that slot with, she still generates deployment points, so maybe you want both. But in integrated strategies, it actually matters that my squad needs a healer, but the game gave me a Vanguard recruitment voucher. I'm saved because I can recruit this unit instead. Another example, there's a medic archetype called Incantation Medics that attack enemies and do magic damage, and the way that they heal is that life steals for an ally. So when they do damage to enemies, they're basically casters, but they are technically the medic archetype. And they do heal, they just heal by life stealing for the people that need the health on your team. Pretty powerful, though their overall damage is usually pretty low. Because they're doing both. Their output, it might be high overall, but their just damage, if that's all you cared about, is not super high. But if I don't need a medic, I mean, I would certainly like a damage dealer. Again, if you have a very limited squad, the idea of a unit that can attack all the time and also heals your squad, that sounds much more appealing at that point. I think that archetype is also just a little slept on. There are some weaker members of that archetype that my experience has been pretty good. I think they're fairly strong. In integrated strategies, anyway. You get the idea. Supporters and specialists, I mean, just by the name of those classes, you know it's going to be all over the place, right? And we're not going to get into that too much, but Podenko, the example I gave before, is a supporter. She's a slower supporter, but she has an ability that makes her heal. In fact, there's an entire slower archetype, supporter archetype, that their whole thing is their skill swaps them from being like a healer to a damage dealer. So their Podenko isn't part of that archetype because this game is inconsistent, but what are you going to do? That's a whole thing. That's not just that one unit. There's quite a robust amount of support for this concept is what I'm getting at, right? I spent a lot of time talking about this because also I know a lot of the audience simply doesn't know anything about Arknights, and so now you do. It's really cool. I like it. What do I not like about it? I do think it's a little too random for my taste. Now remember, this isn't necessarily game designer Zandy saying it's bad because it's too random. I don't know, but I want it to be a little less random. At the beginning of each run, you can pick a set of recruitment vouchers, so you can pick the squad that is defender, caster, archer. Like you can take that squad. There's a squad that's guard, medic, supporter. You could take that squad. There is a random one where you get a unit that doesn't cost any hope, but you don't get to pick which unit it is. A temporary recruitment, they're called. But your 3 recruitment vouchers are random. So that one is a little bit of a chancy one, though the overall value is high. So if you have a versatile squad and you're willing to make a weird team, it can often be strong, but you do sometimes get kind of screwed over. Your temporary recruit is a unit that wouldn't have cost much to recruit anyway, and doesn't particularly fill out the team much, right? They're just not very good in integrated strategies. That's where my critique begins. Though I said that a lot of units the entire design is kind of validated by integrated strategies, there are a few exceptions. One of them are the push and pull archetypes. Already, in my opinion, a little bit out of place in Arknights. They do what they sound like they do. They'll shift units. They can shove them off a cliff into a different lane, something like that. Or pull them to do the same thing. These archetypes are generally very weak, like the unit's raw power is very low unless they are pulling an enemy or pushing an enemy off a cliff, in which case, they one-shot at the enemy, so they're good, right? They're a little janky. I feel like it's a little unfair to criticize integrated strategies for these, because these guys really need, I think, a little bit of a refresh overall. It's not a bad idea. It's a very cool idea. I just feel like there isn't really a great reason why they should be so weak. And the design where they either one-shot an enemy or they do nothing is, I don't know. I would be more interested in maybe them more rapidly pushing and having enemies when they get pushed have some kind of a stagger-esque mechanic. And then maybe if they don't get pushed off a cliff, they stun. There is a push unit that stuns enemies if he pushes them into a wall, I believe. I kind of feel like that should just be a thing. You see what I mean? You should be able to get value out of them a little more easily, because what usually happens is if the map doesn't have any support for them, they do literally actually nothing, except barring like one very notable exception. There is a 6-star pull unit that is pretty ridiculous. It doesn't have anything to do with pushing and pulling. She's just insane. And of course, she's perfectly good at pulling enemies too, because of reasons. And I guess Weedy's fine. If you play Arknights, I understand some people might be prickling a little bit right now. Yeah, there's like 1 or 2 that are okay. Cliffheart's skill 2 is actually all right. But whatever. The point is, I think that's a cool idea. But it doesn't really work in integrated strategies, especially because even if there were, and there kind of are, maps where you can push enemies off, it's not like you know you're going to get them. Anyway, not too much about that because it's not a huge deal, but it can be annoying sometimes. Anyway, it is a weird mode in that it very heavily punishes you for not building your account out in a way that doesn't really make sense for the rest of the game. That's an issue. Now, if you build integrated strategies as the end game of Arknights, does it matter? Yeah, but at the same time, I don't know. I feel like, again, not that integrated strategies needs to take the fall here. Maybe Arknights as a game in general should more often reward you for using a wider variety of units, but the way that it's beneficial to build your account for normal gameplay in Arknights is almost exactly the opposite of the way it's beneficial for integrated strategies. Obviously, having the odd utility unit to swap into your squad is very useful, but overall I would say that focusing your resources on a much smaller number of units is a much smarter decision for every part of the game except for this. And for this part of the game, having a few units leveled up really far, and then a broad variety of moderately invested units is a lot more effective, which means that unless you're willing to kneecap the rest of your account's power, it will take a long time before you have a very robust offering for this mode. To be fair, Arknights does allow you to level units to, a certain breakpoint for their effectiveness pretty cheap. Integrated Strategies has this little thing where a unit doesn't get their full potential power right when you recruit them. You can upgrade them or promote them once, and that will unlock, whatever level you've got them to. When you first recruit them, they're limited to only their first ascension or promotion max level. So if you had the unit fully maxed out, you only get some of their power initially. That is a little bit complicated not having played Arknights, but the short explanation is that if you level up a unit and do the cheap stuff, you do have almost all of their effectiveness before being promoted if you recruit them in integrated strategies. So it does mean that you can level a wide variety of units for rather low cost. You just can't promote them to get additional power out of them, which can be a problem. Like, that can be an issue. You want to scale your squad and do more damage over time. Most of the units in your squad you would want to be able to promote. You just might not always desperately need to do that. So it's not a non-issue, but yeah, that's an okay compromise. I really like this mode, so I'm kind of reaching for something to not complain about, but it's not like that's not a problem. Like, there are things you could do to restructure the game that would improve that, but I think it's a minor issue. I don't think it's a big deal. Okay, contingency contracts. This is, I described before, kind of the opposite, I think. It was cool the way that you worded your question, Quartermaster Sea. You said, what do you think each game mode is intended to test players on? I said I think integrated strategies is testing players on basically their ability to develop a squad on the fly with limited resources. To multitask with their units, you could say, and to use limited resources to make something coherent. To not have a perfect plan going in, and instead, attempt to, I guess, improvise a little bit, which I think is really fun. And also on the breadth of their account, by which I mean having a lot of different units that do a lot of different things, should they need those. Especially in different classes. It's not that significant to have, a healer Vanguard, like who cares normally, but in this mode it can be a big deal. A medic that is mostly offensive, normally meh, but in this mode it can be pretty valuable. Anyway, whereas in contingency contract, I would say they're more testing, all right, give us the best thing you've got, but we're just going to make it really, really, really hard. You can do whatever you want, bring whatever units you want, you can have all the stuff you've got at the maximum level you've got it, but we're just going to make the mission really, really, really hard. In fact, you're going to make it really hard. This is kind of build crafting your difficulty, which you may have seen in some other games. You can pick a bunch of different difficulty modifiers to increase the risk level of the encounter, and the higher risk you clear it at, the highest risk you can clear, the more rewards you get. And they're pretty huge rewards. Potentially, should you have 9,000 IQ, you can put on all the damn challenges, do it once, win, and get a gajillion rewards in like 5 minutes. You won't though. At least likely not. It was hard. There's kind of two ways contingency contract works. One is kind of a daily. You're given a challenge map and some different conditions to make it harder, like a few, very bite-sized. And you play it, you win, you unlock some more challenge conditions to get some more rewards, and then that happens one last time. So you can do, 3 plays through of the map, maybe a little 10 to 15 minute session if you're winning, which maybe you won't. We'll get to that in a second. And you get a lot of rewards for the time you're spending. It can be fun. You decide which challenges you think are not as punishing, or which ones you feel like your squad can call to more. I'll give you a few quick examples. So maybe after I clear the mission for the first time, the basically easy mode of the mission, I get a few rewards, and then it unlocks the first set of challenges. Then I see that the 3 challenges offered are enemies have way more defense, they take less physical damage. I can only leak 1 enemy instead of 3, and let's say the third challenge is your deployment points regenerate 50% slower naturally. I have to pick 2 of the 3 to clear the next difficulty and get the next set of rewards and unlock the final set of challenges. So I can leak only 1 enemy instead of 3, a very, very high defense on enemies, or my deployment point regeneration is slowed. Well, if I have very strong vanguards, it's probably not a big deal to slow my natural deployment regeneration. What's that? Says the vanguard player, which is absolutely me. Natural deployment points? I don't need those. Get out of here. What kind of... I don't use those. So I pick that one. I don't even know how much that is because I don't care. I thought you said vanguards. And then defense. Well, does my account have really strong casters? Because they're not affected by defense, they're affected by resistance instead. Maybe if my primary key damage dealers are just casters anyway, it will make more sense to simply just do that one, who cares? Additionally, defense and resistance work a little funny in Arknights. Resistance is like a percent reduction to magic damage, but defense is a flat reduction to physical damage. This means that in general, if you do extremely high single hit physical damage, that's kind of like the ultimate way to deal damage, unless it was true damage, of course. So maybe my damage dealers are physical damage dealers, but they all attack slowly for a lot of damage per hit. The defense thing won't be a huge deal, although it is a lot of defense usually. They're not completely meaningless, but maybe you'll just go with it, right? Or life is a resource, and so you just say, okay, fine, I'll only leak 1 unit. I won't be leaking. That's my secret. I won't leak any units. And then you go. It's like that, and then you'll unlock some other challenges. Now you need 4 total challenge points, but these challenges you unlocked are worth 2. So one of them might be, vanguards cost triple to deploy and redeploy slower. Whew, okay, so I could put that on, but then it's going to be really difficult to get through that deployment point recovery one from before. It's like this. But that's the primary way it happens. You get one of those, on rotation daily. Though if you clear all of them, it's not like a new one comes out every single day. That would be crazy. But you get, you can try one for the day, and there's, a good handful of them, maybe like a dozen, I would say. Occasionally, there's maybe every few months, it seems like. Maybe every 3 months. I don't know. I haven't played Arknights for 3 months, so I don't know. But about that often, there's been one already, and I've only been playing for a few months. So they'll do a big challenge one. So you can do a bunch of the mini ones all at once. You just get more mini ones basically. But there's also a big one which has, instead of having, 3 small challenges and 2 big challenges, this one has like 30 challenges that you can pick from. And you're meant to increase the risk level way, way higher, like to not just to like 4, but to like 18. It doesn't necessarily mean it's way, 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 way harder. A lot of the challenges are smaller things, but it was hard. It was hard. A couple of great things about this mode before we get into the tough things. It does kind of do the thing that integrated strategies does, where it restricts the use of your different classes. So the type of challenge I mentioned before, vanguards cost more to deploy or whatever. Probably not something like that, but there was one in the previous one where you could pick one of these two. One of them was caster, archer, and guard or something. All the damage dealers cost triple to deploy and redeploy slower, or defender, medic, supporter, I want to say, are triple and cost more to redeploy. So you either can't block anything or survive any damage, or you can't do any damage. Again, you can see how if you had a bunch of offensive defenders, that would suddenly be very useful with a challenge condition like that. Why not just bring my high damage units? Well, the game puts some pressure on that. Of course, the elephant in the room for this kind of thing is because this is really hard and you need a lot of units and it benefits you for them to be leveled up a lot, and you can use anything you have, this one can be considered a bit of a whale bait. This is where Arknights, like basically every game with, the ability to roll for characters, is arguably undone a little bit by the fact that it is a gacha game, if you will. If it wasn't, then you could say, like, this is just you try as hard as you can. But because it is, you can see that even if it doesn't bother you, the part of the purpose of this is to make you want to roll for strong characters. Does that really do that much? Because you can't just level them because it takes so many resources to level a character? Yeah, but you get what I'm trying to say. We won't go on about that now. Like, it's 2023, you know that stuff. You folks know that stuff. But just in case there's anyone in the audience, be aware when you play these games. If you play Arknights because of me recommending it, which I do, you know the game is trying to bait you into wanting to whale, right? Right? Okay, good. Just making sure. But I just don't have the money, and so I don't care. I'm gonna end up having to use the units I have. And furthermore, I'm not the type of player who really wants to sit there and kind of lab the mission over and over. See, the key with these two modes, integrated strategies and contingency contract, is you can play them as much as you want. A lot of these games give you some kind of stamina resource that regenerates over real time, that is how much you can play the missions. Hilariously, Arknights calls this resource sanity, and the joke about contingency contract is it doesn't cost in-game sanity. It actually just costs out-of-game sanity. If you want to keep trying this, it's only like 2 or 3 minutes to do this challenge map, right? But you're gonna die. I mean, you're not gonna win with all those challenges on. I don't like, doing it over and over and over again. I hate practicing stuff like this. An innovator, have a problem, and the problem is that I just can't deal. I will not get good. I'm going to see how good I am right now, and that's just going to be good enough. And you know what? When I put it that way, that doesn't sound too bad, doesn't it? That's very zen, maybe you could say. But the truth is that I'm just lazy, and I'm not interested in spending hours and hours and hours doing the same thing over and over again. That just sounds boring and pointless to me. But trying it a little bit and building a strategy, well, you can do that much faster. Another way to think of this is kind of active learning is very rewarded by these types of activities. If you're going to spend only an hour or two, I just only have an hour or two. I was moving while this event was going on. I don't have time to play it for 10 hours. I'm sure I would be able to clear the high difficulty if I did, but I don't. I was at the car dealership for a few hours. Bad timing on needing to get your car fixed up when I was moving. And yeah, I had a couple of hours and said, you know what, we're going to do, risk 18. And I got it. It was hard, but it was not extremely difficult. And a nice thing that they do is that in the big contingency contract, when it's an event, you get most of the rewards for the lower risk levels. So even if you feel intimidated, like I started playing Arknights like 1 month ago when this event came out. So it came out and I saw people on the internet doing these big bongo clears, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to do anything in this event, but I saw that the first 4 or 8 risk levels, you gain like half of the rewards. You still get good rewards if you clear higher difficulties, but you get most of the rewards for the lower difficulties. So, okay, how kind of you, Arknights. I'll give it a try. And it was fun. I had a good time with it. You can use a support unit. You can basically just use any unit in the entire game, one freebie from your friends. And it's quite easy to you don't have to actually have friends, folks. People listening go, friends? Yeah, I know. I don't know people who play Arknights really, besides Quartermaster Sea. Probably some of you do. And I still have plenty of people on my friends list, of course. These games make it easy to do that, okay? They're picking up what you're putting down. And it basically means that provided a unit isn't like extremely janky, but still good, any fairly obviously strong unit you will be able to just get as a freebie. I would also say that from my extremely light, just buying the monthly pass thing for $5 in this game, for my extremely light, basically no spending in this game, it's only going to be 6 stars, really, that you're not going to have. Generally, the 4 stars and below are gimmies. After a month or two, you'll just have all of them without really paying any money. And they're very useful tools. Lots of the 4 stars are staple units that show up all the time. And a lot of the 5 stars are literally free. They're welfares from events, and you can play the past events and unlock all of them. So that's like 24 fairly useful utility 5 stars. You can buy it. There's a variety of ways you acquire units in this game, and so you won't need too many. Being able to pick one random unit as kind of a wild card is a big deal. Like, that really enables you to just go ahead with some strategies if you only lack a few things, or you can kind of swap out a few things. Only a few maybe truly unique units would you need to go get from your support list, and you can do that. And I like that in essentially all contexts in Arknights, you're allowed to use a support one. You have 12 of your own units, so it's not like that's a ton of your squad. But if this is a point unit and you really take good advantage of them, it can make a big difference. This was kind of meant to be about what I don't like about these modes, but I really like them, so that's difficult. The whale baiting, I guess, and then integrated strategies, I said I would prefer more control. There are some under-fleshed out mechanics in integrated strategies. There's a couple different versions of integrated strategies. In 3, I think light is not a very well-designed mechanic. Not very many things do anything with it. I'm not going to explain light too much, but basically it's a reward for doing well early. But if you lose it, there just aren't very many, like, if you took all the text in all of Arknights about light as a mechanic in Integrated Strategies 3, the word doesn't even show up more than maybe like half a dozen times. It's just not fully fleshed out. It's not really that I don't like it. It's more like it doesn't really exist. Like, it kind of isn't a mechanic. There's this node in Integrated Strategies 3 where you get like a commission, like you have to do a challenge, and if you succeed, then you get rewards. And they did a cool thing where you can pick like easy, medium, or hard challenges. So it'll tell you what they are, and the game will give you one that's, it's random, but it's going to be easier. It's random, but medium difficulty. And one of the random hard ones is to regain 15 light out of 100. You have to lose some, and then you have to restore it. But the problem is, so few things in Integrated Strategies 3 even mention light as a mechanic that it's not so much that's hard, it's just impossible 90% of the time. There is simply nothing that restores light, except for this one node that if it's not ahead, you can see if it's coming up. If it isn't, you're not going to be able to restore your light. Like, I'm kind of exaggerating, but not by very much. Like, that's bad. But I'm reaching. Like, that's like the only thing I could really give you as, and for everything like that, there's like 10 more things I really like. It's a pretty minor mechanic. Like, that doesn't ruin my enjoyment of it at all. Integrated Strategies 2 is a little too random, in my opinion. There's this mechanic they added in Integrated Strategies 3 where you get a die, You can even kind of upgrade the die. So from a 6-sided die to an 8-sided die, you can unlock the ability to re-roll the die when you get a low number. And so even though that sounds like it would make it more random, the real effect is that a lot of things that were literally just completely random in Integrated Strategies 2, you get on a die roll from Integrated Strategies 3, and you can re-roll and upgrade that die. So you can choose to make it more reliable if you want, which I think has made a big difference. I reliably win normal difficulty Integrated Strategies 3, and I can't even beat Integrated Strategies 2 on easy difficulty. I don't think that's because it's harder necessarily. I think it's because it's random, basically, and I just haven't played it that much. Whereas Integrated Strategies 3, I think, is more of a skill check, and I've played more of it. I was losing a ton early on. It's not that I'm good, and I'm saying that one rewards skill more. I'm just saying if you work at it, you will end up winning because it is based on your performance. So when you learn, you can use that knowledge and then win. Whereas I haven't as much felt that way about 2. I don't know. I wonder if people who've played it more feel differently, but not a huge fan of the differences. In other words, I just feel like they've made some design decisions that are good, but then they didn't just stick with those, you know. There's maybe a little bit of design bloat in Integrated Strategies 3 also. Like, do we even need light as a mechanic? There's like 20 mechanics in this stupid game mode. Anyway, contingency contracts, I don't know what I don't like about that. It's fun. More of them. There aren't more of them. It's not a very sustainable type of content. It's good, but I can't have more of it because it's not really sustainable for a developer to just make more of it all the time. Is that really a critique? I like it so much that I just want more of it. I don't know what to tell you about that one. Yeah, I do think sometimes the mechanics are a little unclear. They're interesting, but sometimes I feel like that could be more clear. Really, I think that's a case where I'm being intolerant of learning curve. You know, just try it a few times and you'll learn, you know, what works well. That's not a big deal. I don't know. I don't think that's a real criticism. But it's true that if you have no patience, it is kind of at odds with the rest of Arknights a little bit. If you were going to be able to breeze into an event and get the rewards, you might die out of nowhere for no clear reason. Sometimes Arknights has these weird mechanical spikes, like a fight was not necessarily easy, but didn't have anything highly mechanical about it. Everything is just as you see it, and if you can clear those challenges, then you win. And then suddenly there'll be a fight where you need to know very specific things about the enemies, or it is essentially impossible. It's not really harder. You just suddenly need more information that the game gives you, but just to say that the amount of mechanical complexity in the game is quite irregular. Some of them are very vanilla, and others are quite a bit more in depth. For a simple example, in the big contingency contract that I did the high level risk, and it was very hard, but I had a great experience. It was a good amount of challenge with a reasonable time investment. And it was up for like a week and a half, so you might be thinking several hours, good lord. But remember, that was the only one, and you had like a few weeks to, you know, do it when you wanted to. You could have divided that up, you know. It was on a seaside, and so there was this cool mechanic where you get these pontoons that allow you to place units on the water where they normally can't stand, or surface enemy units at a key time. Some enemy units in this particular one are invisible when underwater, so you might put a pontoon in range of one of your attackers, so that when the invisible underwater enemies walk over it, they're briefly above water and you can shoot them and kill them. Lots of things like that. It was cool. And when an allied unit on a pontoon dies, the pontoon is gone too. This could be bad because you want to deploy units there, but it could be good because non-snorkeling units that are invisible underwater take damage and are slowed as they walk through the water, unless you disable that with the challenge condition that disables it. But exactly how the pontoons will work out, or what your deployment order needs to be to remove whatever pontoons you want to remove, or make sure you can actually put units where you want to put them, Definitely took some fiddling. If you let those units die early on, you were left with essentially no tiles where you can defend from enemies. So I guess you could just kill them all with gigantic damage, but it's hard. So, that was an initial frustration, but not a huge deal. There's this buggy that will load up with units, and then until you kill the buggy, all the units are still inside. And if you leak that one buggy, it counts as leaking all the units in it. So you have to destroy the buggies if they load up. Even if you have 3 units you can leak, you can't let the buggy through because it's got 3 units inside of it. That's obvious once you've seen it, but was initially a little unclear. Stuff like that. But another example would be there's this event going on right now where when enemies die, their soul pops out and you have to hit it a few more times to kill them. What was unclear to me initially is that they respawn infinitely, potentially, if you don't... Like, the way you kill their soul isn't by doing damage, it's by hitting it 5 times or something like that, which sounds like not a meaningful difference, but it means that units that hit slowly for a ton of damage, which are insane in most of Arknights, are like weirdly terrible against these. And I have this unit that does this slow attack, but it counts as hitting 3 times, and she was weirdly amazing against them. And so I thought, wait, so it's fine? Why am I not killing them? Why are some of my units not killing them? Not a huge deal in the long run, right? But that need to, at unpredictable times, kind of stop and learn a completely new mechanic, and that is not very consistent when or how much you need to do that. Yeah, sometimes I feel like they go a little too far, and it'd be better to just learn the mechanic for that, you know, event or whatever, and then we know it, and we don't have to learn a million new things not every single mission, randomly every 3 or so missions, that is maybe a problem for contingency contracts. You wake up this morning and you want to do the daily contingency contract, but this just happens to be a mechanically dense one, and so it's going to be like an hour instead of like 15 minutes. But again, I'm really reaching for a problem. I think we talked enough about what makes for a good endgame in Tower, well, and in games in general. Basically that it uses the game systems, like that it is rewarding to have played essentially all of the game. I would say across integrated strategies and contingency contracts, there aren't very many things you can do or invest in units in Arknights that aren't useful in some way. There are some, but not that many. You could find a reason to use or find useful a lot of units. And even redundancy, like even if a unit is like different but mostly worse than another alternative, having 2 of them is frequently very useful, or just increasing the likelihood that you get one of them when you recruit them or something like that, or maybe one of them just dies in combat and you want to be able to deploy the second one. An example, if you play Arknights, would be I own Horn and Ashlock, and Ashlock is basically a largely inferior Horn. She has a few weird advantages, but she is one of the best examples of a unit that is just kind of straight power crept by another unit. But having both is good. These units are defenders, very tanky, but they're cannons, so they fire very far away, but they can't shoot enemies between melee and their far away range. So there's a medium range where they can't hit because they're firing cannons. The cannon has to lob to the area where you get the flavor. 2 of this unit, I mean, sometimes you can barely attack enemies except at the range of sniper, like long range snipers, archers that have very long range. And these fortress defenders. Those 2 archetypes have longer range than pretty much everyone else. So sometimes you just want to bombard enemies from that range. And having a more robust roster of units that do this, instead of literally just Horn, who's very good at it, nothing wrong with Horn, but having, more choices for that is good. And ideally, a mode like integrated strategies, a mode like contingency contract, would present situations where that would be where you want the player to have a use for that kind of thing. And I absolutely did. There was, if you played the contingency contract, there was that thing where a bunch of tanky enemies spawn but they have to walk through a little maze. And you can put fortress defenders way up at the top and shell them from above and they're outside of the attack range of those stupid guys with the shovels that fire arts damage at you. That was awesome. You easily kill all of the enemies that spawn down there with this cannonade from above, and nobody else really hits from the right range to kill those enemies that way. So that was a lot of fun. That was a unique experience. Ethan was also good for that. People don't know what I'm talking about if they haven't played Arknights now, but I thought some Easter eggs for people who have would be fun. It's cool. I hope that was a satisfying discussion of what I like about those modes, slash a more robust introduction of, you know, yeah, I'm recommending this game, but you shouldn't play a game because a YouTube person you like recommended it. You should play it if I give you reasons that appeal to you. And so what I try to do is give you, this is why I would recommend it. I hardly ever recommend anything. Here are some very specific reasons why I recommend it, though I could give more. Maybe we will sometime, but for now, yeah, I hope I gave a robust answer to this question. And that it was interesting to hear about. Thank you very much for introducing me to this game, Quartermaster Sea. You didn't exactly recommend it as per se, right? It was the voice acting review parlay for people keeping score, but yeah, you were the one who introduced it to me, and I thought it was awesome. So, cheers.